Hi there, it's Kevin with Rogue Deck Builder here with the top 10 cards that I want to brew with from Kaldheim. This is going to be a very difficult list to make. This is a tradition on the Rogue Deck Builder channel. Usually when a new set comes out, I try to give you the top 10 cards that I want to brew with from that specific set. And keep in mind, they're not the most powerful cards that are included in the set. These are just the cards that I want to try and find the potential for. So I like synergy cards. I like cards that don't just scream that they need to be played in a competitive deck. I want to find a specific place for them and see if I can tune those cards to find a home in. In this case, we're going to be talking mostly about standard. So this was a very, very difficult list comparatively speaking to other sets in the past. Usually it's pretty easy to find 10 cards, 20 cards, 30 cards that I want to try to brew with in the various formats. However, like I said before, it's very, very tough to see how this set is going to pair up versus the Ikoria cards like Yorion or the Throne of Eldraine cards like the Great Henge or Embercleave. Those two cards specifically are going to push out a lot of cards that I think would be fun. I mean, that's kind of what's going on in Standard. It's very surprising they haven't banned Yorion, Embercleave, and the Great Henge. And I named those specific three cards because it is not only the extremely powerful cards, but all roads lead to playing those cards. If you're in control, you're going to be going Yorion. If you're in mid-range, you're going to be going some sort of Great Henge build, especially if you're in green. And if you're in aggro, especially red, you're going to go into Embercleave. And I call hogwash that those archetypes would not exist without those specific cards. Great Henge, for example, I think is fine to go another route like Vivian or Garruk's Uprising. I think that would be a fun little way to build decks and still be competitive. And there are a plethora of other aggro strategies that are being pushed out because Embercleave is just better than running those specific aggro strategies. And not to mention all the landfall cards that then push both the Great Henge and Embercleave. You can see why we have such a stale standard. So in Kaldheim, there really wasn't a lot of cards that just were like, well, this is going to breed a whole new archetype or this is a busted card. There might be a few that escaped me here. But speaking of escape, there's no Euros. There's nothing like that I think it just comes and slaps you in the face and it's like, this is going to be format defining and whatnot, which is that's good news. We need a power reset from Throne. However, it did make this list very difficult to find 10 cards that I think are even viable to brew with. Anyway, we're going to give it a go. So let's start off with our number 10. Our number 10 is the Dream Devourer. Now, this card is very interesting because it allows Foretell to be cast on any card. So if this card is out, then you can foretell it by paying 2 and then reduce its mana cost by 2. And whenever you foretell a card, Dream Devourer gets +2/+0 until end of turn. It has some very interesting creature types too with Cleric and Demon. There have been some Demon cards in the past that want to get out quick Demons. There haven't been very many 1 or 2 drop Demons. This is another Demon that could go in those specific Demon decks. So beyond Standard, this one does look fun to really ramping out those Demons, giving them Foretell and then allowing them to then have this Demon Tribal. I haven't really explored that for that particular card, but I did think it was interesting in the future to be looking at that. However, for Standard, where I like this is in like a mono black shell. So Massacre Worm is night and day if you can get out on turn 4 versus turn 6. Turn 4 means that maybe you can wipe mono red or at least wipe half the board of Gruul and get rid of some key pieces of Gruul and have a 6/5 body out that then taxes your opponent whenever one of their creatures dies. Ugin is the same thing. If you can get Ugin out on turn 6, Mono Black has been trying to do this with cards like Solemn Simulacrum. This might just be a better way to get Ugin out with a card like Dream Devourer. I like the toughness on Dream Devourer. It's going to survive Bone Crusher Giant. It's going to be able to block some of the 2-powered creatures until they get a bigger creature. And then the Foretell is kind of weak to give it +2/+0. I mean, that just kind of ignore that second end, but there might be some scenarios where you can cast a lot of foretell cards in one turn and then actually have that work. Think of like artifact cards that then will cost nothing because you reduce it and then you can foretell them all in one turn and maybe, give it double strike or something. That'd be an interesting little scenario to play out too. But these are 2 cards that I've identified here with Massacre Worm and Ugin. There are some demons that get interesting with this. There was a new demon out in this set too that I believe isn't there a 6-mana demon in this new set? Didn't look at cards in the new sets that paired with these cards, but this one is my number 10. All right, so let's go on to my number 9. Now, let's just get the cat out of the bag here. This is a competitive card. Standard, I've been looking at it, and there really isn't just a very ideal home for it. There are some interesting things, though. This is the Pyre of Heroes. Of course, going back into Modern and into Pioneer, and of course, in the Commander, this card is going to be nuts. This is a 2 mana, and you can pay 2 and sacrifice a creature. Search your library for a creature card that shares a creature type with a sacrifice creature and has converted mana cost equal to 1 plus the creature's converted mana cost, and you put it on the battlefield. So the line that I want to get it to work is this zombie/knight. So I've got this line here with Falmir Knight. You may or may not have drawn a card with it. Then you can sacrifice it for the Mire Triton, which then mills you 2 and puts 2 cards in your graveyard. And then the next one you can get is like the Liliana's Standard Bearer that will get you a card off of that being used. And then you can go in like Deathless Knight and then Sire Conrad the Grim. And then if you have the Aghanims Awakening or some other ways to bring back cards from your graveyard, this sort of life works together. The Mire Triton Deathless Knight sort of works together, and then the Sire Conrad the Grim actually really works together within a little bit of a self-mill strategy and whatnot. So I kind of like this little line. Probably won't be playable. I'm going to be looking for other lines, but I've already identified a pretty good curve on. There's some elves that work well together. You really want to find an ETB effect, enter the battlefield effect, or some sort of haste effect or die effect that works with the Pyre of Heroes. So it'll be interesting as more cards get into the pool, or if we find other scenarios that work. Thought about Warriors 2 with Winota as a way to then go find Winota with one of your 3 drops. You can then Pyre of Heroes it to go find the specific, especially as a human, a 3 mana warrior human, and like, okay, let's just crack it to go get Winota. That's a way for this to work as well. So this card, of course, this energy card, it's like catnip to me. So anyway, we'll get on to our number 8. Our number 8 is one that I admittedly, it's going to be very, very tough to make this scenario work, but I thought this was a really cool design card. This is the Draugr Necromancer. Draugr Necromancer is a 4 mana for a 4/4. If non-token creature an opponent controls would die, exile that card with an ice counter on it instead, and you may cast spells from among cards in exile your opponent's own with ice counters on them, and you may spend mana from snow sources as though it were mana of any color to cast those spells. So this you just play in a big mono black, kill everything, or maybe like a black blue, kill everything that comes out, and then you can cast your opponent's threats against them. So 4 mana for a 4/4, yeah, that's probably not going to be the most viable card to be able to make that work, and then you have to start killing stuff. And it's actually not terrible in like a top end of an aggro shell too, where you're forcing your opponent to block, and then you can cast those cards against them. But it's going to be fun nonetheless to make this card work. Alrighty, so next up on my number 7 is another card that admittedly is going to be pretty difficult to make it work, but I thought I'd give it a go. This is the Waking the Trolls. This is a whopping 6 mana. I think they should have made this 5 mana. I think 6 mana, and especially making this a rare, this one's going to be tough to make it work, because you want stuff to get more of an ability, I would say, than this ability of destroying just a land the first time it comes out. So you get to destroy a land on 1, and then you may put a land card from the graveyard on the battlefield on 2, and then if an opponent has less lands than you, you create a 4/4 green troll warrior creature token with trample equal to difference of lands. So I thought this is kind of cute in, there's like Confounding Conundrum that you can run with the field of the land that you can sacrifice and then make your opponent go search. And then you can be ahead in lands in that way. There's a couple of destroy, and then in red they have one that you can destroy a non-basic land, and an opponent can go get a basic land. And if you have Conundrum out at this point you're in Teamer, which might be a little bit too much to ask for, even though I think the 3-color decks will be viable again with them fixing the mana base. You have the full, you have all the options available for the dual-sided lands, which will be interesting. But anyway, this would be a cool little card if you can make it work. Hopefully you can keep your opponents off of lands, and then you can get a 4/4, couple 4/4s, maybe 2, 3, 4. I guess in ramping, if you're going to be running this in like a Teamer ramp shell, this might be a pretty decent one as well. So Waking the Trolls is just an interesting card, a fun little card to build around. I'm going to do my best to make it work. All right, on to my number 6. My number 6 is the Mechanic of Boast. This is the Dragonkin Berserker. I really like this card. So first of all, I think this is a good card in the form of like a big red shell. I'm not sure I like it in aggro, because in aggro I think you need to be running stuff that have haste. So if you compare this like Robber Rich, you probably don't want to be playing it. There is some undercost. There is a 2 mana dragon in blue-red, the Dragon Fairy, They could work about getting the boast cost down because the boast costs 1 less for each a dragon you control. What I really like about this is just a 2 mana with first strike. It's a pretty good roadblock when you put it out. It's going to trade with stuff or just first strike down a lot of attackers. And then late game, you can start attacking in with it and creating 5/5 red dragon creature tokens. So interesting little ability there. It also does pair decently well with some of the dragons. So like the Terror of the Peaks, if you can get it out with like a Terror of the Peaks, and that's also going to be in your big red shell, then for 4 mana, you'll be able to create a 5/5 that then does 5 damage to something, and maybe you can grind out your opponent. So again, this is going to be a tough card to make it work, but I really do like this boast mechanic, and this one seems to be a pretty cool boast mechanic with the Dragonkin Berserker. All right, on it to my number 5, and now this is really where we're starting to switch gears. So my top 5, I actually think will have some pretty decent homes. And they're the ones that I'm definitely more interested to building around. I have some homes for this first one, which is the Usher of the Fallen. So Usher of the Fallen is a 2/1 for 1 Spirit Warrior, and you get to create a 1/1 white human warrior creature token for Boast 2. This, I think, will make Winota Warriors viable. So this is the kind of the curve already that I've identified. So beforehand, we only have the Warriors only have 2 1-drops for Warriors. We have the Seagate Banneret, which is a 1/2 core warrior that has 5 to give all your creatures +1/+1, which that does actually synergize with Usher of the Fallen and Fireblade Charger. The Fireblade Charger states that as long as it's equipped, it has haste, and whenever it dies, it deals damage equal to its power to any target. So there's your 1-drops here with Usher being the best one now. Then there are plenty of 2-drops with Winota. There's like this equipment strategy you can go with the double striking core. But then you have the Kargan War Leader that gives all their warriors +1/+1. So you're not really having to rely. Winota has been so Winota dependent. Like when you don't have that curve and they don't have an answer for, or when you don't have that curve without Winota in your opening hand, you lose a lot of games. When you do have that 1, 2, 3 Winota, you win a lot of games. However, with this is going to give an aggro strategy. Then Winota coming down just is even more, frosting on the cake. And then if you do get Winota out on one of those where you have like, one creature out, and then you hit like a Kargan War Leader and you've boasted with the Usher of the Fallen, and then now you have another 2/2, you can start to come back with just the Usher of the Fallen. It's the perfect piece to put this deck together, and I think that it does in fact make Winota viable. I don't know if Spirit is much of an option right now in Standard, but this might actually even be a card for Spirit in both Pioneer and Modern as another 1-drop. This is a nice aggressive 1-drop that then can create some more aggression or going wide after that. So really liking this card too. Creating a human warrior isn't bad either. There is a human strategy right now for Mycoria that this could also go in, but it's Winota that I think it pairs the best with. Alrighty, so now we are on to our number 4. Our number 4 is the Burgi, God of Storytelling, or Burgi. I don't know how you pronounce this one. 3 mana for 3/3. Whenever you cast a spell, add red to your mana pool until the end of turn. You don't lose mana as steps and phases end. So you will lose it at the end of your turn, but until then, you can cast stuff in your pre-combat, or your main phase, your combat phase, and it will still stick around for your second main phase. And then creatures you control boast twice. So we've already shown 2 boast cards that could work with this, this boast ability, especially the dragon one. It gets very interesting because it reduces it every time there's a dragon out, and pretty soon you can get a ton of dragons out. But I think this, whenever you cast a spell, add red to your mana pool, this is going to get busted in Pioneer, Modern, Legacy. So it's going to be one of the more anticipated cards, I'm sure, going forward. I'm not sure if it wants like a storm, go right into a storm shell, as it does die to like lightning bolt. But however, if you can get this sucker out to survive a turn, you can do some pretty crazy stuff. There's a party creature I thought was kind of interesting with this, that it adds red mana equal to the number of cards in your party. That then you can start like looping if there's ways to then return it and then recasting it. You can start generating a lot of mana by netting up mana with it. There's a few other like artifacts, just casting artifacts, then adding a red. So some of those 1 mana artifacts become free, and some of the 2 mana artifacts require half as much. So think of things like the golden egg and the spare supplies. I don't know if that's going to work in a deck like this. Maybe like the Yorion, the Jeskai Yorion decks might want this, as it keeps generating up every spell that they cast. Who knows? Probably not. But there's got to be some brewing in standard to actually break this card to make it a lot more viable. Thinking about the dragon, the sprite. This card would be pretty good after that. They can both stick around a turn, and then you can start casting these red mana spells that become free, like your creatures you control gain trample until a turn, draw a card. There's a free spell. And you can kind of go off at that point. But very interesting card. And what I like about these particular gods is they have the backside to them, so that helps them get across the legendary rules. So if you have this out as the creature form, you can still do the backside, which is the Harnfell Horn of Bounty. And this has discard a card, exile the top 2 cards of your library. You may play those cards this turn. This one gets interesting with any sort of card that wants to go in the graveyard. It is 5 mana, though. That's the thing with this card. It's very, very tough to get out at that point. And then you can start exiling the top 2 cards and playing those cards by discarding a card, which could go nuts. And what's really good is they do synergize off each other. So it's kind of a neat little effect to be able to exile cards off the top of your library, then cost less because you're casting them and adding a mana and whatnot. Alrighty, so now on to my number 3, which is another god. This is Tegrid, God of Fright. I am in love with this card. This card just seems so fun. With whenever an opponent sacrifices a non-token permanent or discards a permanent card, you may put that card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. You kidding me? You make them discard an Ugin, you get an Ugin. You make them sacrifice it by making them use a sacrifice ability, which there are plenty in standard. We'll see in a second. You get it onto the battlefield. That is pretty nuts if you can get this 5-drop out and protect it. The backside of it is also pretty interesting, with the target player loses 3 life unless they sacrifice a non-land permanent or discard a card. They work together, so your multiples actually do have some, and the untapping is pretty good too. So late game, you can start to get a lot of value off of the Tegrid's Lantern, and eventually it can be your win condition at that point. Where I really, really like this, though, of course, is by making your opponent discard cards. There's Kroxa that works, but so there's some decent ones in black here, like the Liliana Steward that sacrifices the target opponent discards a card. Soul Shatter makes them sacrifice a creature or planeswalker with the highest converted mana cost among creatures and planes you control, so you're going to get the best one back. The Freaka's Libation can get an enchantment or a creature. At instant speed, the Demon's Disciple. Each player sacrifices a creature or planeswalker. Then you're, of course, getting it back. Rankle is very interesting with this because you can make them discard and sacrifice a creature. And it is also on curve, meaning you can do Rankle and then the next turn throw that guy out. And if Rankle is survived, then you're going to get even more value off the Rankle. Taste of Death, and there is another one that came out of this set, which sacrifices 3 creatures or 2 creatures. You get them all back. And the Mythos of Snapdax, which is very interesting with this, especially if you're in a black, white, red shell. Each player chooses an artifact, a creature, an enchantment, and a planeswalker from among the non-land permanents they control, then sacrifices the rest. And then if red-black was spent to cast a spell, you choose the permanents for each player. So late game, it's kind of this big, if there's a big board game state, Mythos of Snapdax, you get all those things sacrificed back under your control. So very, very interesting synergies with the card. I think it's going to be very fun to build around. It actually does synergize back up here with our number 10 card by getting it out a little bit early, and then so foretelling it and then casting it the following turn, and then if it survives for the next turn, then you can really start to get the value out of it. So definitely looking forward to building this deck. I think it'll be one of the first ones to build. All right, on to my number 2. My number 2 is going to be the Reflections of Litjara. As it enters the battlefield, you choose a creature type, and whenever you cast a spell of the chosen type, copy that spell. There's some interesting ones right now. Elves seem pretty fun to then copy a bunch of elves, because a lot of the elves right now have draw a card when they come into play, and they also ramp up mana, which is exactly what this deck wants to do. And then there is the line that I want to go, which is Wizards. So Wizards are on color here. We have things like, I believe this works with Gadwick. I'll have to get a judge weigh in on this, but Gadwick is going to still read the copy as X. And so even though the legendary creature will not survive, it will still enter the battlefield and you'll still be able to draw a ton of cards off of it. So say it's on curve that you cast this for 4, and then the next turn you cast, or for 5, and then the next turn for 6, you pump 3 mana into Gadwick. You'll get a Gadwick left over and you'll get 6 cards. It also gets interesting with things like the Cloudkin Seer. When there's a battlefield, draw a card. You'll get 2 cards off of that and 2/2/1s back to block. If you pair it with things like the Ironcrag Pyromancer, you're going to get 3 damage for drawing that second turn. You start copying the Ironcrag Pyromancers, they're going to get out of control pretty quick. And this, you might even be able to go in this kicker shell with the Corehelm Chronicler and the Seagate Stormcaller. Both of those do want to be duplicated. Seagate Stormcaller, by copying it, then you get to copy your next instant sorcery spell. So basically, you can cast something like even a Fire Prophecy at that point and to have 3 or 2 copies of it, because the copy from the Seagate Stormcaller. Tajuru Paragon, I believe, does work as well, because the creature ability, it's going to cast as a wizard, and then if you kick it for 5 mana, you're going to be able to get many cards, many other wizards out of your library from the Paragon. And then we also have the Baron Tolarian Archmage, which doesn't work as far as keeping one of your copies back, because they are legendary, but it is an ETB effect too that does bounce something. And so getting another copy with the bounce and bouncing a threat of your opponents or bouncing one of your own permanents back is going to then draw a card at the end of the turn, which I think is viable with that wizard shell. There's a lot of things that I think can work with the Reflection of Litjara. I even thought about this in sort of a party shell too, where even though you're only getting one side of it, but then you can run like the Paragon and the Ox that is one of every type 2, or the Beast, the artifact 1 to 2 mana, and you can get a lot of value out of those. Alrighty, so that leaves us to our number 1. So let's go to our number 1 card, which is In Search of Greatness. So let me give a little bit of analysis for this card. A lot of people, when this came out, they're like, this card is so broken. Let me tell you, it's not. This card's actually very difficult to make it work, because it's a strictly pretty bad Aether Vial. So in Search of Greatness says 2 mana. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may cast a permanent spell from your hand with converted mana cost 1, plus the high converted mana cost among other permanents you control without paying its mana cost. So the problem is, though, in Standard, though, is taking your 2-drop slot. So that's a very pivotal turn for many decks to then establish something that's going to, the best case scenario is this is then going to, if you have a 1-drop, like let's say Gilded Goose, stick around, or like a 1-mana artifact, then on turn number 2, you cast In Search of Greatness. You haven't done anything with that mana wrap from the Gilded Goose. You probably haven't done anything from your other 1-drop. You still are probably behind what your opponent's doing. Then on turn number 3, at the beginning of your upkeep, then you can get a 2-mana spell into play. If you're going to keep going above that, these cards have to survive, and you're casting them from your hand. So it means that you have to have the card in hand that actually does work with the card that is out on your battlefield. And In Search of Greatness cannot read itself. So it's going to be very, very tough to keep your hand full to have targets for this In Search of Greatness and continually to get higher and higher converted mana costs. So what you want to be doing with this card is finding things that have good enter the battlefield triggers. And this is a deck that is, a lot of people make the mistake of Aether Vial. They're like, oh, Aether Vial is really good because you can put in an aggro shell where you can just get out, an extra card. But it's more of a tempo-based shell, or the thing that makes Aether Vial even better in many of these decks is that it can cheat things in at instant speed. This card does nothing of that, and it's a huge cost. The difference between 1 and 2 to start, and then Aether Vial also, you have to basically put on a specific mana cost, and then you can tailor it to your needs. So you can have everything in your deck cost like 2 or 3. So this one's going to be pretty tough. So it has to be your highest converted mana cost too. So keep that in mind. You can't be like, well, I've got a 1-drop out and a 3-drop, but I have a 2-drop in my hand. So there's a lot of build around that this card is going to have to work with. But I do think it is still a card that's very interesting to try to make work. And some of the things I've kind of identified is the first one being an Enchantress shell with the Citizen Champion, because you do want to be drawing cards, and that will keep your hand full with the champion, hopefully find you other targets, and then there's a good spread of enchantments of 2, 3, 4, even like a Doom Foretold type shell. You get the Citizen Champion goes against Doom Foretold gets Elspeth Conquers Death. Elspeth Conquers Death can then go get I'm trying to think that one rotated now. I'm thinking of the one that gave all creatures on your side +1/+1 and all creatures negative on the other side. But I'm sure there's a good 6-mana enchantment that then can come out. Or at that point too, you can just there's plenty of other things you can cast from your hand, like go back to the scenario of then putting the companion of Yorion back in your hand and then casting it for free that turn, and then bouncing it, and then being able to cast another spell. That's basically what the upside of this card is you don't have to use that mana on that turn, so you can dump other things into it. So of course Kenrith is a really good card for this because say it's your turn 4, or you have a 4-drop out, you throw Kenrith out for free, you still have 4 or 5 mana left in your mana pool because you got Kenrith out for free. That way you can give creatures haste this turn, maybe play another creature. And again, though, it's very, very difficult to make this scenario work. So these are a few cards that I've identified. Fierce Empath is pretty good here. You can have 6 or greater, tailored to your needs of whatever you had out. So you have like an Eller Gargoloth out, and a Fierce Empath goes and gets a 6-drop, and then you cast for free for that, and then you have all that mana left. It's drawing you a card when it attacks in. Next turn you get a 7-drop. It's got that nice little like a gorilla into a thorn mammoth. I think is a pretty cool little fight synergy. Things like Llanowar Visionary that's going to draw you cards and add that mana. Things like Garruk's Uprising, which then we'll get some value out of putting a creature with power 4 or greater and drawing a card. That's going to be the key, is finding ways to have excess mana to be able to utilize it, and then also be able to fill your hand up to continue to get value out of the Search of Greatness. So again, the not a busted card. I think people are really, really off the mark with this particular card. Anyway, that is my top 10 list of cards that I want to brew with. I would love to hear your comments in the comment section below. Did I miss a card that you think is more of a Kevin card? If I did, put it in the comment section below, and maybe we will choose that card to brew around. So, once again, the Dream Devourer for a good foretell ramp, mono black strategy. We can even go into like a demon strategy and maybe a commander, maybe some pioneer or historic. The Pyre of Heroes, the Draugr Necromancer, the Waking the Trolls, Dragonkin Berserker, Usher the Fallen, Burgi God of Storytelling, the Tegrid God of Fright, the Reflections of Litjara, and In Search for Greatness. Hope you enjoyed this list, and let me know in the comments what you think. This has been Kevin with Rogue Deck Builder. Thanks for watching.